A major car manufacturer spends years telling everyone that hydrogen is the future. They push it hard. They invest billions. They make presentations. And then, almost by accident, they build an electric vehicle that actually works. Now they're sitting there staring at order books, completely blindsided by what's happening. That manufacturer is BMW, and they just admitted something absolutely wild. They cannot keep up with demand for their latest electric car. Yeah, you heard that right. The same company that was hedging its bets on hydrogen fuel cells is now scrambling because people actually want their EV. So what changed? Well, here's the thing. Sometimes companies need a wake-up call, and BMW just got theirs delivered in the form of thousands of pre-orders. They've finally figured out what the rest of us have been screaming about for years. Maybe, just maybe, the issue wasn't that consumers didn't want electric vehicles. Maybe the problem was that they'd never actually built one worth buying. And now that they have, the floodgates opened. Let me break down what's actually happening here, because the numbers tell a fascinating story. BMW recently unveiled their new EX3 at the Munich Auto Show, and the response has been nothing short of remarkable. Within just 6 weeks of the launch, they racked up 3,000 orders. Now, before you start thinking that sounds impressive, let me add some context that'll make you chuckle. When Chinese automakers saw this press release, they must have been doubled over laughing. 3,000 orders? In China, that's a Tuesday afternoon for some manufacturers. But hold on, because there's more to this story than meets the eye. These 3,000 orders aren't coming from all over the world. They're exclusively from Germany, just one market. And Germany, while being the birthplace of automotive engineering excellence, isn't exactly a massive car market by global standards. They move around 2.8 million vehicles annually. Compare that to China's 32 million, and you start to see the scale difference we're talking about. Germany's car market is less than 10% the size of China's. So yeah, 3,000 might seem small in the grand scheme of things. But here's what makes it significant. This represents the most pre-orders BMW has ever received in Germany for any vehicle before it even hits dealership floors. Let that sink in for a moment. In their home market, where they've been selling cars for over a century, this electric vehicle has broken their own record. Now let's talk about what you're actually getting if you decide to drop some serious cash on this thing. Because spoiler alert, it's not cheap. The starting price in Germany sits at 69,000 euros. Convert that to US dollars and you're looking at roughly 81,000. Australian buyers? Brace yourselves. That's about 122,000 Australian dollars. Ouch. And before you ask, yes, there will be a more affordable version coming sometime next year that'll start closer to 60,000 euros, which translates to about 70,000 US dollars or 110,000 Australian. Still not exactly pocket change, but definitely more accessible. Here's an interesting wrinkle, though. Because of that pricing, BMW's new electric darling won't qualify for Germany's upcoming EV incentives. The government is offering 4,000 euro rebates, but there's a catch. Your vehicle needs to start below 45,000 euros to be eligible. And honestly, there aren't many EVs, or even regular cars for that matter, that can squeeze under that price point in Germany right now. So BMW buyers will be going in without that financial cushion. What are you actually buying for all that money? Let's get into the specifications because this is where things get genuinely interesting. At launch, only one version will be available. They're calling it the EX3 50X drive, and it comes equipped with dual electric motors. The combined output? A healthy 463 horsepower and 476 pound-feet of torque. If you prefer metric, that's 645 Newton meters. 0 to 60 miles per hour happens in 4.7 seconds. 0 to 100 kilometers, right around 5 seconds flat. Now, before the performance enthusiasts start drooling, let me pump the brakes a bit. This isn't really designed to be a track monster. The acceleration is certainly respectable, but speed isn't the main selling point here. What BMW is really pushing is range, and this is where the EX3 starts to separate itself from some of their previous electric offerings. We're talking about 400 miles of range on the EPA cycle. That's 644 kilometers for those of you counting in metric. If we look at the WLTP cycle, which tends to be a bit more optimistic, that number jumps up to 805 kilometers. What does this mean in the real world? Well, in pretty much any normal driving scenario, you should be able to achieve that 400-mile, 644-kilometer range without too much trouble. Under ideal conditions, You know, lots of city driving with regenerative braking, stop and start traffic where electric vehicles really shine. You might actually get close to that 800-kilometer mark. Of course, there's a reason they're achieving these numbers, and it's sitting underneath the floor. BMW fitted this thing with a massive 108 kilowatt-hour battery pack. That's a serious chunk of cells. Charging speed is pretty decent too, theoretically capable of around 400 kilowatts. Getting from 10 to 80% charge takes 21 minutes, which sounds reasonable until you start comparing it to what's happening in other markets. Take Zeekr's new 7X, for instance. Similar battery size, but it does that same 10 to 80% charge in just 10 minutes. Or the Zeekr 001, which accomplishes it in a mind-bending 7 minutes. Now, 21 minutes still qualifies as good for a German automaker, don't get me wrong. But it's clear that the charging technology race is heating up, and some manufacturers are pulling ahead fast. One of the reasons BMW is achieving such impressive range comes down to the battery technology they've chosen. They're using new cylindrical cells that are actually a bit larger than Tesla's much-talked-about 4680 cells. The energy density is quite high, possibly even slightly exceeding what Tesla has managed with their format. It's a smart move, and it shows that BMW is finally taking the electric powertrain seriously as a primary focus rather than a side project. Quick tangent here. I charge my own electric vehicle for absolutely zero cost between noon and 2 in the afternoon every day. The electricity company I use makes this possible. And I've also got a 50 kilowatt-hour home battery system paired with a large solar array on my roof. Between those two, my electricity bill for everything, including the car, is basically nothing. The solar company I worked with really delivered, and if you're thinking about going that route, it's genuinely worth exploring. But back to BMW. So here's where things get really interesting from a production standpoint. BMW has openly admitted that based on their current manufacturing capacity, they simply cannot meet the demand they're seeing. Think about that for a second. A major German automaker with all their engineering prowess and decades of manufacturing experience is essentially saying they didn't see this coming. They're going to need to either ramp up production significantly or potentially add entirely new production lines. That's not a small undertaking. It requires massive investment, retooling, training, and time. Looking ahead, the next vehicle in BMW's new class lineup is going to be another i3. I'm betting it'll feature similar technology to what we're seeing in the EX3. And if it does, if they apply the same approach to design, range, and capability, I think it's going to perform quite well in the market. Because here's the thing about BMW's existing electric vehicle lineup. It's been rough. I've seen some of their current EVs discounted by as much as $60,000. $60,000. Let that number sink in. When a car loses that much value that quickly, or needs that kind of discount just to move off the lot, it tells you something fundamental is wrong. You'd think a $60,000 discount would make anything an attractive purchase, right? But here's what happens. People see the deal, they get excited, they start doing research. They look up the specifications. They examine the charging speed. They check the range. They compare the battery size to competitors. They look at power output and all the other details that matter when you're buying an electric vehicle. And then, almost universally, they reach the same conclusion. Even with $60,000 off, it's still not worth it. That's how far behind some of BMW's previous electric efforts were. They weren't just a little bit off the mark. They were miles away from what consumers actually wanted. But this new EX3? It's different. Fundamentally, genuinely different. This is actually a well-executed electric vehicle, and the market is responding accordingly. People are opening their wallets. They're placing orders. They're waiting in line. It's the kind of response that BMW should have been getting years ago if they'd taken the electric. Transitioned seriously from the start instead of hedging their bets and hoping. Hydrogen would save them from having to fully commit. The implications here stretch beyond just one successful model launch. If BMW can maintain this momentum, if they can keep producing vehicles that meet or exceed consumer expectations without breaking the bank, they're not going to have any trouble selling electric cars going forward. The demand is clearly there. The willingness to buy exists. The technology is finally good enough to justify the investment. There's really only one significant caveat that could derail this success: price. And that brings us to a broader conversation about why German automakers are struggling in certain markets, particularly China. It's not that their vehicles are bad. It's not that the engineering is subpar. The problem is value perception. Chinese consumers look at what German brands are offering, they look at the price tag, and then they glance over at domestic options that offer similar or better features for significantly less money. The BMW badge doesn't carry the same weight it used to. That premium cachet, that automatic assumption that German equals better, has eroded. When you can buy a locally made electric vehicle with better charging speeds, similar range, more technology features, and a warranty that's just as solid for 30 or 40% less money, why would you choose the German import? BMW is learning this lesson in real time. They're discovering that building a genuinely good electric vehicle isn't enough if the price doesn't make sense to consumers. And in markets where competition is fierce and consumers have multiple excellent options, pricing becomes even more critical. You can't rely on brand heritage alone anymore. You can't charge a premium just because your headquarters is in Munich. You need to deliver real, tangible value that justifies every dollar, euro, or yuan you're asking for. The EX3 seems to be threading that needle, at least in the German market where brand loyalty still holds some sway and consumers are willing to pay a bit more for a nameplate they trust. But as BMW looks to expand this vehicle into other markets, particularly Asia, they're going to need to think very carefully about positioning and pricing. Because the competition isn't sitting still. Chinese manufacturers are improving at a breakneck pace. Korean brands are pushing hard. American companies are investing billions in electric technology. The window of opportunity for traditional automakers to catch up is closing faster than many people realize. What this whole situation really illustrates is a fundamental shift happening in the automotive industry. For over a century, companies could rely on their engineering heritage, their manufacturing expertise, and their brand recognition to carry them through transitions. But the shift to electric vehicles is different. It's not just about swapping out one powertrain for another. It's about completely rethinking what a car can be, how it's manufactured, how it's sold, and what consumers actually value. And companies that cling too tightly to old assumptions, that move too slowly, or that hedge their bets instead of committing fully, they're going to find themselves left behind, watching from the rearview mirror as newer, more agile competitors speed past. BMW appears to have finally gotten the message. They built something good, and the market is rewarding them for it. Now the question becomes whether they can sustain this momentum, scale up production to meet demand, and continue innovating at a pace that keeps them relevant. Because one successful model doesn't mean you've solved the puzzle. It means you've figured out one piece. There are dozens more pieces still to place, and the competitive landscape is only getting more challenging. For anyone watching the automotive industry, this is a fascinating moment. We're witnessing in real time which companies can adapt and which ones can't. We're seeing who took the electric transition seriously and who dismissed it as a fad. And we're learning that consumer loyalty has limits. Build something people want at a price that makes sense and they'll buy it, regardless of whether you spent the last 5 years insisting hydrogen was the answer. The EX3 might just be the wake-up call BMW needed. Let's hope they're actually awake now because the race is only going to get more intense from here. If you found this breakdown helpful and you want to stay updated on the latest shifts happening in the EV world, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. And if you've got thoughts on whether BMW can maintain this momentum, or if this is just a temporary spike before they fall behind again, drop them in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear what you think. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep your eyes on where the industry is actually heading, not where companies claim it's going.